Hi, you're watching Hindustan Times and I'm Aditi Prasad. We have with us today the former head scientist of epidemiology and communicable diseases at the Indian Council of Medical Research, Dr. Raman R Gangakhedkar. He was the face of ICMR briefings during the first COVID wave in 2020. Now he's retired, but he's deeply anguished at the manner in which the second COVID wave is sweeping India and at the tragic and heartbreaking scenes that are playing out outside hospitals, outside crematoriums, mortuaries, and in many homes across the country. Dr. Gangakhedkar, the healthcare system has broken down with a massive spike in cases just witnessed in the last 1 month. I know it's very difficult, perhaps, to pinpoint one reason behind the second surge. Some are blaming our own COVID and inappropriate behavior. Others are blaming election rallies. Still others are sort of blaming the double mutant or triple mutant viruses out there. But I want to ask you whether there is anything that we could have done differently at a policy level to stop the second wave.
No, it's very difficult to say only about one particular reason what we could have had done. Though at the same time, I must also say that we are into two minds. No, when we think that way, you look at the larger society, you find people don't believe COVID is here, so they don't adhere to COVID appropriate behavior. And you look at one section of the society, that tends to say, shall we start reflecting on what went wrong, as if everything is over. I think we need to find a balance. We need to accept that the wave is very much here and fight with the wave. We would learn lessons which could be useful subsequently. But then if I was to say one of the best things which we could have done was, there is a public health principle which tends to tell us that when the cases decline, what you need to do is intensify your interventions, comprehensive interventions, rather than reducing those interventions. Because if you do that way, then the problem tends to persist, especially for those infectious diseases which are for elimination. But as I say, now that is not the moment to discuss. Whatever has happened, it has happened in the past. Let us accept in the first place that yes, it is here, and we need to now think in terms of how do I handle this, because there are huge differences between the first wave and its implication and the second wave and the implications.
What is that? What are the differences you're pointing out between the first and the second wave, and particularly in the implications?
See, in the first wave, our objective was different. We didn't want that imported infection from, let's say, China or Far Eastern countries which were showing that, or Italy at that time in Europe. No, we didn't want that to come to India and establish itself. But in the first wave, we know we did reasonably well. But the only way that perhaps this could have been handled was ensuring that we go for a lockdown, try to see that international travelers don't come in India. And that was reasonably successful given the larger population base that we had. We managed to not only delay the onset of the curve, but the numbers that we talked of were pretty small, because that was a reflection of it not going in for a larger wave at that point in time. But when it comes to second wave, we know the seeds of this infection now are sown in almost every geographic area. Whether you call that by state, you call that by district. Now what will happen? We know once it starts, the whole process kickstarts, you will perhaps get very little time, because the wave becomes so sharp that you need to handle those who are sicker, which may be a smaller fragment, a smaller proportion of those people. But you need to ensure that you will be able to provide assistance for their medical needs, ensure that medical supplies are there, and at that juncture, you will need to handle every issue little more cautiously, because any step could perhaps lead to some kind of a damage in the health system. And at the same time, one must recognize that lockdown cannot be an approach the way we had it nationally. Now we may have to go for a calibrated lockdown. And when you talk of calibrated lockdown, even calibrated lockdowns are if you look at them, they tend to lose the so-called effectiveness as you go down. No, because you will find that the effectiveness is lost in between until the time you actually ensure that the isolation of somebody who's actually infected is done effectively.
So, what are the policy interventions? These are things that, of course, as patients, as people, as citizens, we need to possibly become more aware about how to go about our treatments, or how to approach, when to approach hospitals, when not to approach hospitals. But what about policy interventions that are needed at this stage of the COVID storm that is sweeping the country? What, if you were to list down three policy interventions that will resolve this matter, which will help, or not resolve, but go a long way in helping, curb this second wave, what would those three interventions be?
See, there is one thing which I would say. We should not look at the numbers, no, that tend to be very high. Because in this wave, the numbers that will come will be always very high. No, but what is more important in the second wave is to try and ensure, address the hospitalization needs and the deaths that could occur. Now, why am I a little worried on that account? You find that a large proportion of people tend to seek care late in this particular second wave. And why is this happening? Because they tend to test late. No, one factor could be they themselves are not going in time to test themselves. The second factor could be there are delays in getting the test report because the load on the testing system is also very high. So to me, early diagnosis, no, efforts to ensure that we would have better opportunity to test early, turnaround time from testing should be shorter, as short as possible. Try to have a good mix of rapid antigen test as well as the RT-PCR, because RT-PCR capacity is finite. So if I only use RT-PCR for diagnosis, perhaps I will not be able to diagnose many more who may be in the society, and the spread could occur. So you have to use judiciously the rapid antigen test and RT-PCR. And what is also important for all of us to think about is try and curb the unnecessary use of RT-PCR for travel between states. Because, if somebody asks me whether if I am to go from Maharashtra to, let's say, a state like Madhya Pradesh, and then I'm asked to provide a test report of RT-PCR as being negative, I think that is not required. I'm wasting those resources, the time and money and the limited capacity to test, no, for issues that are least important. As it has spread across. Now, what am I going to do by spending my time and efforts on such a issue which is trivial? Because these people are unlikely to be found as positive. So change in the testing strategy would also be equally important. Don't look at the numbers. Try to rationalize the treatment and popularize the treatment. It is important that the messaging has to be group specific. If you are found positive, what all do you need to do? Today, what we can improve upon is messaging. I think it's critical that we need to have group specific messages. But what you generally are seeing as of now, most of the messages tend to talk of the three things that you have to do as COVID appropriate behavior.
Right.
Now, that is something which is given. No, everybody in the country came to know about those three strategies when we
During
had
the
the
first
first
wave.
lockdown. Now I have to move beyond to promote couple of issues. What you will be required to do when you are symptomatic, what you would be required to do once your diagnosis is confirmed, what treatment should I be expecting, if at all. The second issue is how and why COVID appropriate behaviors can prevent the transmissions, the numbers from rising. Even if this is a second wave, the second wave can be brought down maybe in 2 weeks' time if 95% of the people ensure that the COVID appropriate behaviors are adhered to, and why and how feasible it is. You are the ones who are empowered. No government can try and ensure that COVID appropriate behaviors are strictly followed. No, because fear and coercion will have a short lasting effect, and that's not a prudent strategy. The third thing which I would always say is the issue with respect to community mobilization. It becomes extremely crucial. No, so far people tend to think that they are at the receiving end,
Right.
whether it is trying to take care, trying to ensure isolation is done, trying to use COVID appropriate behavior. The fear based campaign that has been generated because of the panic that has set as of now, you find that people don't feel that they can do something. And I think that entire civil society movement is extremely critical, because now the social spheres of influence will not be limited to few people who perhaps could make a difference earlier. Now the social spheres, when it comes to decision making, shift dramatically at family level. No, because if let's say I am infected, or if somebody in my family is infected, the decisions are rested with them. The decision to enforce that COVID appropriate behavior should be followed. Perhaps you could try a housewife in a young couple setting, reminding every time to the husband when she goes out, when he is going to go out. Try to ensure that everybody in the family comes together, because their social influence has to be used rather than a social influence that we are looking at higher level. It does not work in such circumstances when it is spread so much.
All right. That those, I mean, at least two of those things the government can take care of. The third, as far as the community's involvement, I think is already happening to a very large extent, because I see a lot of people getting up, reaching out to help others in this time of crisis, whether it is organizing an oxygen langar at a gurudwara, or whether it is actually going out and feeding people at these hospitals, and so on and so forth. But I want to talk to you about
No, but what I would say is there
yeah,
we are doing it. But what is most important is the outbreak is severe in urban areas in some of the states
right.
as of now. But other states or other districts or cities where it's not severe, please use this opportunity not only to create infrastructure to handle that, but also to ensure that community mobilization occurs in a manner which is well thought of. No, anticipating that the wave is going to strike one day or the other. No, anticipating that vaccination rollout should ensure that all 45 years plus should should be actually vaccinated as early as possible. Now that's something which is critical even for those states where it is not severe. I think what we need to do essentially is develop guidelines as to how you can handle second wave when the outbreak is very severe, and wherever the outbreak is not so severe or it is yet to begin, or there has to be a differentiated approach of strategies to ensure that mitigation of risks is done well, and that planning has to go in to ensure that that happens. We need to teach those people, advocate the states or district authorities. I think key here lies in decentralized approaches. Earlier, when we went for lockdown in the first wave, the approach was one jacket, which was used. Whereas here, the outbreak tends to be different, the vulnerabilities tend to be different. You realize there are differences in every possible thing, healthcare infrastructure or whatever you talk of. Now, people should be able to take decentralized decisions by themselves in different settings. No,
So no one size fits all, unlike
no,
the first
no.
wave. And I hope the people in the corridors of power are listening to you, so that the messaging becomes for respective target groups, rather than a one size fits all. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you, viewers, for watching our broadcast. We'll keep coming back to you with more. Keep watching HindustanTimes.com.